Hi, everybody. Welcome to 20-minute tips and topics. I'm Nicole Walberg with Walberg College Counseling. My colleague Dana Ponsky of Dana Ponsky Consulting Services, your guide to college. We do 20-minute tips and topics videos to help you understand college admissions process and other really important things to think about when preparing to apply to colleges. Today, I'm honored to have Chris Sanderson from Sanderson Testing Services here to talk to us about testing and test prep, which I think is really important anyway, but now that we're in a really unusual situation with COVID-19, I think that he's got even more to share with us. So with that, I'm gonna click to the next slide and have Chris introduce himself.
Hi there, I'm Christopher Sanderson. You'll hopefully be comfortable enough by the end of this discussion to refer to me as Chris. And you can see a little bit of my background here. I've been doing test prep for about 13 years, and I have had my own test prep company for the last 9.5. And basically right now, what kinds of questions we're getting a lot of in the test prep world are the kinds of things that seem to be changing at a rapid pace. So I'm really excited to be here today to chat with Nicole and offer hopefully some insight into the test prep element of all the changes that we're seeing amidst all of the COVID-19 test cancellations, site closures, and so forth. And here's just an overview of some of the things that we cover. So a lot of our discussion today is going to focus on SAT and ACT prep, which is certainly our bread and butter and primarily where we see the most requests and service the most students. But we do also cover a variety of other standardized tests up through the grad level exams like GRE, GMAT, MCAT, etc. And we also work with students on academic subjects. So the changes that we're seeing not only impact standardized testing, but it's also going to impact your day-to-day school, as you saw towards the end of the spring. And as you're probably appreciating, we're going to see some of those changes this fall as well. So I look forward to providing any insight I can into these kinds of standardized tests and the challenges that students are going to face when taking some of this type of academic coursework. All right. So Nicole, is there anything specific here that you have seen on the admissions end that you want me to, really pay primary attention to as far as some of these changes to the testing landscape that we've seen?
Yeah, I think, with the flux and how things are continually developing, I would love if you could just talk a little bit about the differences between what test optional and test blind means in this new kind of realm, because as I'm sure you know, and as some of our viewers might know, some schools are only going test optional for the 2020-2021 admission cycle. But they may have never ever heard of what test optional means and what test blind means.
Right.
And then that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. So to that point, and I mean, the first thing that I would recommend, and this is why I enjoy working with knowledgeable professionals like Nicole and Dana, who can provide you insight. So if you do have questions about specific schools, I'm really interested in university A, B, or C, and what is their policy for admissions if I'm applying this year as a rising senior, or if I'm going to be applying next year as a rising junior. They can provide you with insight on that information. But the one thing that I really want to highlight here is when we hear this word test optional, or this phrase test optional, I think that a lot of times it sounds exciting. And I think sometimes the knee-jerk reaction to that phrase is, oh, good, I don't have to do it. And woohoo, fewer tests, that's awesome. And I think both for students, for parents, SATs, ACTs can be a stressful time. Preparing for it can be challenging. It's tough to manage that on top of your existing schedule of rigorous academic coursework, of extracurriculars, and so forth. So typically speaking, if that's something you could take off your plate, at first glance, that sounds like the right option to exercise. It sounds like something that is exciting, that schools are trending in that test optional, and some schools even test blind direction, where they're not going to be utilizing that in admissions, at all. But I think that what's really important for students and parents to do is to take a deep breath and try to get good information as to whether or not a school that's going test optional means that the right option for you is to not test or to not submit scores. And so the one thing I'll point out here is that it's one of the few remaining measurables, especially for more advanced students. If you normally make an A+ and other students get an A- or a B+, well, the nature of admissions is that it's very competitive, and that's an opportunity for you to shine. A lot of schools this past spring transitioned their grading systems to pass-fail. So if you pass, but so does that A- or B+ student, you're all passing. Well, now there's a little bit less disparity among those students when looking at their academic performance. So AP exams this year, for really advanced students who are taking APs, the APs were a little bit, I'll call it watered down this year because it was an open book format and it was a shortened test. So a lot of students were able to see a level of success that might have been strong, but not strong in comparison to others. And so I think that when you take away more and more measurables, if you take away grades, if you take away the weight of your AP results, if you take away an SAT or ACT for a student, you have fewer and fewer measurables. And for really strong students, you want more of those measurables. You want concrete, quantitative data that you can show on paper. Here's why I am likely to perform here at university A, B, or C, whereas other students might only be able to perform here, and it makes you a more attractive applicant. So I think it's really important for students to see test optional, do the research and find out test optional means that there's an option to take the test and an option to submit scores. And in a lot of cases, the right option is going to be to go ahead and prepare for that while you have this window of time.
Mm-hmm.
As far as students having to test during the fall of senior year, this is something that I think we have an opportunity right now, especially this summer with a lot of extracurriculars, a lot of travel plans, a lot of summer programming getting canceled. It might be an opportunity to really focus on prep without a ton of other things on your plate instead of having to try working on prep. And if you are a rising senior, I'm sure you can appreciate that during junior year, even if you had testing and end up getting canceled, or rescheduled in some capacity, if you did any type of prep, I'm sure you can appreciate that during the school year with your regular academic coursework and extracurriculars, it's hard to find a place to really fit test prep in and be able to focus on it. So now might be an opportunity to make it easier to prep and therefore make testing a little bit easier. The other factor that we want to consider is how much downtime have we had since we've really had to use our brains? I think a lot of times it's very easy to assume that with the passage of time, we'll see improvement. But the fact of the matter is, if you had classes that were maybe a little bit easier, a little bit lighter, you got a little bit more lackadaisical about your schoolwork this past spring, you don't have anything going on this summer, you're not taking summer classes or really working hard on things academically that are going to expand the mind, and then you try without preparation and without a little advanced work put into practice throughout the summer, you try to take an October or November SAT to take one more crack at it, but it's been 6 or 7 months since you've really looked at test prep, or 6 or 7 months since you've really had rigorous coursework in place, then you might see a drop off because of that. So we want to be mindful of that. And as far as the testing opportunities, there is one thing that if you are testing in fall of senior year, it can make the testing experience a little bit different, because for many of you, unfortunately this year, you might just have that one opportunity. We don't know yet how many testing opportunities we'll have. It's nice, AP just yesterday actually opened up a few additional test dates for September and October. So, there should be several options and we're excited about that. But again, some of that might be optimistic. We don't know what the landscape's going to look like 3, 4, 5 months down the road. So it is really important to, just keep that in mind as well, is that if only having that one testing opportunity adds an element of pressure to the experience because you have to get a score in by a certain deadline for an application, and if that's going to negatively impact your testing experience, then that's a factor to consider when prepping.
I think that's fantastic information. We will add some links to Khan Academy where there's just some free resources, but I also want to make sure that people are aware of the resources that are available on your website, Chris, just to help them get a leg up on the content that they may need to prep up for as they're preparing for these tests?
Sure. And so we offer practice tests. Right now we have automated proctoring available, and it's to score the test. We do provide a full score report, and that we do charge a fee for. It's a relatively nominal fee in the grand scheme of things, but that's just a $10 fee. But as far as the actual automated proctoring, those links are up on our website, and there are plenty of free practice tests available. So if students are comfortable scoring their own tests, but they want to take it in more of a test-like setting, then check out sandersontestprep.com, click on practice tests. We have the actual proctoring instructions read word for word, verbatim, the way you'll experience it on test day, and it'll have the timing up on the video. So when it starts, it'll say, welcome to the SAT administration, and it'll walk you through those instructions just like test day. And when it says begin section 1, it'll say begin. You'll see the timer counting down in front of you on the screen. And it's a good way to sort of hold yourself accountable to that real test-like experience. Because I know a lot of times when we test at home without it, it is a little easier to take a section, go like grab a snack for a little bit, like hang out, with the dog for a few minutes, check in with mom or dad, see what they're up to, kind of come back, do a section a little bit later on. And it takes away from, that real test-like experience. So that's one thing that we can do, even if we are doing it from home, to try to hold ourselves to that test-like standard, because that's going to give you the best prep for when you actually have to go in and take it in real conditions.
What a great resource. I love that. And I love that a student isn't going to need to have another person, with them in the room to time them. That's a fantastic resource. Thank you so much for providing that for people.
My pleasure. So we talked about test optional and test blind. How hard do I need to try to get a test date? So I think the real question here is or the real sort of statement that I would make here is really just make sure that you're being honest with yourself. So are you actually making a legitimate effort to try to prep for and then to try to take these kinds of tests? I think that colleges on the whole are going to be extremely understanding of the current situation, and they are not going to penalize a student, certainly, for not having taken an SAT or an ACT, or for not choosing to submit scores. Because even if you have to take an SAT and you have an opportunity, but like we mentioned previously, your only opportunity comes after you've been kind of out of the mix academically for 7, 8, 9 months, well then that opportunity might post a score that's not really reflective of your true ability. So colleges are not looking to penalize students. And that's the whole idea about test optional, is that in making that shift, they're basically saying, we're not going to hold this against you, but it is important to make sure that you are making some effort to hold yourself accountable to being able to test if possible. So here it says, are you a strong test taker or applying to selective schools? So if you are not a strong test taker or you're not applying to selective schools, then it's probably not going to make or break your application, because schools that are a little less selective are going to be a little bit more lenient and not focus on test scores as strongly, which is the case normally. Pre-COVID or in our current admissions climate, it's going to be very similar that more selective schools are going to care a lot more about seeing those numbers. If you are a strong test taker, then if anything, test optional should be something that you're psyched about, because you want to exercise that option. Go ahead and test and have that result. That's a strong result that you can be really happy with, and that you can actually show concretely one of those measurables that sets you apart. Again, it's that A+ versus A- student, or that A+ versus B+ student. When you're up here, right, when you're that A+ or A- student, and you're being compared to, someone with a grade slightly below yours, and then that gets taken away because it switches to pass fail, or because it changes to, a 100%, 70%, or 0% grading system, which a few students have, experienced. It's really important to find as many measurables as you can, because you need to find ways that you can, on paper, concretely show your academic strength. And there are schools right now looking into why you haven't tested. And some schools, as part of their essay questions specific to the school, really want to know that information. And I have seen a range of the way that those questions are worded. Some of them are worded in a pretty friendly manner, and some of them are a little bit more intense about, hey, what's going on? Why haven't you tested? It almost comes across a little bit aggressively in some of those situations. And I think it's really important to note that, if schools are going to ask about why you haven't tested, it's really important for us to make sure that we have a reasonable answer. And if you haven't tested because you signed up for 2 tests and both dates got canceled, or because the closest test center, to where you're located is 80 miles away, and it would require your family going and staying in a hotel overnight, and it's either, a cost issue, or you don't feel comfortable, from a health or safety issue, those reasons for not testing are completely valid. And I certainly don't want to give the impression to any student that you should ever put yourself in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, or, where you're potentially jeopardizing your own safety or the safety of any of your, family members who you're quarantining with. But we do want to, again, be honest with ourselves about, did I at least make an effort? Because colleges are going to want to know that.
Absolutely. And I was listening to Carnegie Mellon yesterday present just about admissions and how that's changed for them and what's going on their campus. And they did say that, their Common App, that's what they use. And there is a COVID-19 section on the Common App that's different than the main essay. And that's where they would want you to put that information. It doesn't have to be a full up story. Just, hey, I tried, my testing centers were closed due to COVID. The closest one was 80 miles away, and just due to the circumstances, I couldn't make it, or I'm immune compromised, whatever it might be. Maybe you live with somebody who's immunocompromised. Colleges are going to understand that, but you've got to be able to articulate that. And that's something that your independent college counselor, like myself or Dana, can help you with. Obviously, Chris is really skilled and understands this too. So if you're working with him and you're trying to get in a test date and it's not working out, I know he'll have great mentorship for you as well. So let's move on to the next slide.
So I think that this is, at the moment, the $1 million question. And right now, what we're seeing, ACT actually put out a statement yesterday, and they sent out notice to schools, basically making a call to schools saying, we would like to open up several test dates. Would you be available, or would you be willing to offer your facility as a testing center on these dates? And I think that they did that following a statement that they made saying that for the moment, at least, and who knows when it will be revisited, but for the moment, they have taken the online testing at home option off the table. And personally, I think probably for good reason. I think that there are just too many question marks about that so far. I think it's something that we can probably, figure out, some good details on and information on over time. But right now, I think there are questions about access. There are questions about, the test integrity and things that, need to be answered before that is offered as an option. So for right now, ACT has said, we're not going to pursue this test at home option and create something online, but we would like to open up more test dates. And so I think that right now, what we're trying to do is get creative. They are asking schools to potentially, in areas where the weather would allow for it, consider the option of testing outdoors. You can use a football field and set up individual desks that are 6 feet apart and, fit a number of test takers there, in an outdoor setting that is going to allow everyone to stay safe and to not have to share the same air, but still, be able to offer that in-person testing experience. So some of those types of creative options, I'm sure, will be exercised, but right now they are looking at testing priority, and that's seniors who haven't yet tested, who need to get a score in, whether it's for admissions, whether it's for scholarships, maybe it's, related to recruiting, if it's, someone who's an athlete. So seniors with no tests, and then seniors with scores, but again, they have a little bit less time to get those scores in. So that's going to be sort of next priority. And then juniors are going to come a little bit later in the process. And, as far as the priority is concerned, and if they are going to offer limited access to registration, we've seen a few different models where maybe they open up registration, for example, to seniors like a week earlier than they do to rising juniors, to give seniors an opportunity to, fill those seats so that they can ensure that they are going to have an opportunity to test. But for the moment, there is some prioritization, but the number one question is, how many schools can we get to agree to open up their facilities, and in what ways? And that's going to be, where there is the biggest question mark, because at the moment it is facility based, meaning school by school is determining whether or not they can offer testing. And that's going to change depending on what state, what region of the country you're in, and even all the way down to what school or what district, you're in. A lot of those policies are going to be determined at a local level. And so it's really just making sure that when you do sign up for a test date, do your homework, check with, the school, try to make sure that you're getting up-to-date and accurate information so that you can be as prepared as possible to handle some of those changes and adapt, as necessary. If one facility closes, but they offer you an opportunity to transfer that registration to another facility, you want to make sure that you're seeing that email the second that it comes out, and that you're then trying to transfer to that other school or that other testing site as quickly as possible, because within a few minutes time, everybody's going to see that email and everybody's going to want to fill those seats. So when we're dealing with limited seats, it is something we just have to be a little more proactive about and make sure that we're on top of it.
That's great. So can you tell us a little bit about what's difficult about prepping online?
Sure. So some of the challenges that we've seen are, I'll kind of jump down to this third, main bullet point here first, because I'm sure that's something that most students are probably already aware of or familiar with. I'm sure most parents, having witnessed it with school over the last, few months of the spring semester, are also very familiar with. But there are going to be distractions at home, and if you have a dedicated study space that is absolutely quiet and allows the opportunity for you to focus, then you can oftentimes prep online and maybe even get more out of it than you could with prepping in person. But there are distractions at home that we're all familiar with in a realistic world. You've got siblings or parents at home. They're studying. They're doing work. They are mom's on a conference call. Your brother's in the other room playing video games loudly. Whatever the situation is, there are going to be those distractions that we have to factor in. You have pets at home. You have deliveries coming, to the door. If you're in your room, how many distractions does the average SAT or ACT, test taker have in their own room? A lot, so it can be a little bit more difficult prepping online, but there are some advantages to it, which we'll talk about. But we want to make sure we just give ourselves the opportunity to succeed. So try to avoid those distractions as much as possible. And one thing that it seems like such a little thing, but I will tell you, I have seen it be an obstacle for students in terms of their progress through prep. And I really try to very actively remind students and parents about the importance of this. If you're going to be prepping online, make sure that whether it's for a standardized test like an SAT, or even if you're just doing regular schoolwork, who knows how many of us will be online by the time school starts in the fall. It looks like it's going to be a pretty significant number. So if you need to print something, please print it. And I agree with trying to conserve paper. I agree with trying to, conserve money and not, have to print more than necessary so that we're not wasting ink and so forth. Those are certainly valid points, but don't make your learning more challenging because you're trying to answer a complex geometric figure question from an SAT on the screen, and you're kind of squinting and looking at it and trying to navigate a question that's pretty high level difficulty question on a figure that you can't label right there in front of you, or draw, an arc angle for each similar angle in the figure. Those kinds of things are easy fixes just by printing your practice tests. So make sure that you print tests and have that kind of tangible material in front of you. If that's the way you're going to see it on test day, which it is, then we need to prep accordingly and make sure that we're kind of mirroring or paralleling what that test day experience is going to be like. So that's my one little odd tip that a lot of people don't actively think about when they think about online prepping, is to actually print material, make sure you've got that tangible copy in your hand that you can work with on your desk at home, the same way that you will on your desk when you're taking the exam.
That's great, because you're trying to replicate the exam as best as possible, right? So you've got that paper test, you've got the tool from your website, Chris, the proctoring that you can get. I think that those things combined are going to make a great optimal practice test environment.
Mm-hmm. And one other point I wanted to add specific to the time management point. So I think this is something that we always recommend to our students when making the transition from summer to fall, meaning once school starts back up, how do we, kind of keep test prep in our schedule? And right now, we still have a little bit of window of time before school starts, but eventually, basically, as you get closer and closer, a really helpful tip for time management is to try to set your test prep time at literally the time of day and the days of the week that you will be able to continue with when school starts. Something that we see happen with students a lot of times, and this is in a pre-COVID world, we see it the same way, that a lot of times over the summer, students have that flexibility like we do now, and you sleep in till 10 or 11 or 12:30. So students sleep in a little bit late. They kind of wake up, they go out in the kitchen, they grab something to eat, maybe take a shower, get dressed. They kind of settle into their day. They sit down at noon or 1 o'clock and they say, okay, great, I'm going to work on my SAT or my ACT for an hour now. And they sit down and they focus on it and they work on it, and they're productive during that time, and they get a lot out of that, whether it's studying on their own, doing a practice section, or having a tutoring session. They're being productive during that window of time. But then as soon as the school year starts, well, we don't have 12 till 1 p.m. every day to focus on SAT. So what happens is SAT or ACT, that type of prep, gets put on the back burner, and it gets fit in after the fact once we have prioritized our school day schedule, our extracurriculars, our sports, our homework, etc. Then we kind of, okay, well, I have 15 minutes on Saturday afternoons from 4 to 4:15 p.m. and that's the only time I can squeeze in a little SAT or ACT studying throughout my week. We want to avoid that by picking a time of day and picking days of the week that we can get in a habit of doing our prep, and then continuing that once school starts. So if you do it every Tuesday night from 8 to 8:30 p.m., even if it's just 30 minutes, that's totally fine to keep it short, for certain types of, certain sittings. So some days of the week, you might have 2 hours available. Some days you might only have 30 minutes, but try to stick to that time. So if every Tuesday from 8 to 8:30, that you don't have extracurriculars that are going to overlap with that, you can take that 30-minute break from your homework on those Tuesday evenings, then start practicing at that time so that even once school starts back up, once extracurriculars start to get reintroduced, once sports hopefully open up soon, you'll be able to still maintain that same prep schedule. And it really helps with time management. And we see tremendous success from students who are able to adopt that schedule over the summer.
So what's the advantage of prepping now? Why should
the good news? Yeah, so the good news is that as frustrating as it might be to have some of your summer plans canceled, and we're probably not traveling or at least as much as we thought we would, or to the same location, certain kinds of summer programs have been canceled or modified. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that it opens up this rare opportunity. You can really maximize your time because you have fewer of those extracurricular kinds of activities going on. You have less travel. So this is really a chance to, as frustrating as it may be, and I can only imagine, all the plans that you've had changed, over these last few months, it can be something that we sort of focus on the negative. So to provide a little bit of silver lining here to, think about making lemonade out of lemons, what we want to, really look at is this is a rare opportunity. And for anyone who has done prep yourselves, for anyone who has friends or siblings who have done prep, any junior can tell you, especially, that when you're trying to practice for SATs and ACTs during junior year, with the level of academic rigor that you're dealing with all your extracurriculars that you're trying to be as actively involved in as possible, trying to find time to really focus on prep is very challenging. For rising seniors, when you start getting into applications, just filling out applications and completing essays is a tremendously taxing task that you have to do heading into senior year, along with your regular schoolwork and extracurriculars and so forth. So to have to prep during that window of time is also equally as difficult. So those are 2 very busy years, all of junior year, and then particularly that first half of senior year where you're managing some of the application process on top of everything else. It can be really difficult to prep. Now is a wonderful window of time where you can focus on prep with a little bit more time available. so that you can really spend the time on it that you need to achieve the results that you want. And also probably a little bit more clarity in your mind because you aren't juggling as many things. So you really do have a chance right now to actually prep with fewer distractions and hopefully get more out of this window of opportunity that we have, to really prioritize prep. So knowing that the test optional option is something that we even might want to exercise now is really an important opportunity to take advantage of that extra time that we have. Let's post a score that we never thought possible. Let's really give ourselves a chance to see if we can knock this test out of the park with a little bit of this added free time that we have to prioritize it. And let's make this a strength of our application rather than a question mark.
So what considerations should we take into mind when planning test prep and testing?
So I am pretty conservative in my recommendations here about the amount of time that one should spend preparing, not necessarily in terms of how far in advance you should start preparing, but in terms of the amount of time per week. So the typical score improvement, so that we can think of big picture first, and then we'll talk about your weekly time commitments. But for big picture, a pretty standard numerical improvement that we see is what you see outlined here. For SAT, when you prep, most students, if you're doing tutoring, you're going to see an initial jump in your score because you're learning content or you're learning strategies that you haven't yet been introduced to. But then once you get past that initial spike, a good rule of thumb is about 10 points a week. So if you want to go up 160 points, then that's going to be roughly 16 weeks, depending on how much of an initial spike we see in those first few weeks. But let's call it roughly 16 weeks, 10 points a week is a good predictor. So we say, okay, I'd like to give myself 4 months to make sure that I have plenty of time so that I can see that average amount of improvement and still hit my target score. And then with ACT, it's about a point every 3 weeks. So very similar, you're going to see an initial spike, but then that's the consistent improvement that we can expect. So if you want to go up 7 points on your ACT, then you want to say, oh, well, that's about 21 weeks. So I want to give myself maybe 5 months to prepare. So take a look at the total amount of improvement that you're looking for and try to set up a timeline so that you're making sure that you give yourself enough of, an advanced start time to your prep so that you can be hitting your target score, ideal world, 1 month before your actual test date, because the improvement doesn't always occur linearly. You're going to see improvement and then a dip and then a plateau and then improvement and then a dip. And it's going to look a little bit more like a scatter plot, if any of you are familiar with that statistical term, but it's going to look a little bit more like a scatter plot than a regression line, meaning it's going to dance around a little bit in terms of what that looks like numerically for your performance on tests. So you want to try to set up that timeline with that month buffer in mind so that you can try to hit your target score and repeat that a few times so that heading into your actual test date, you feel as comfortable as possible. So that is how you can come up with an ideal testing plan, is to walk backwards from a target test date, looking at the amount of score improvement that you would like to see. As far as weekly time spent, the regularity matters a lot more than the total quantity of hours. And my recommendation there is it's got to be 4 to 5 times a week that you're seeing SAT or ACT material. Like I mentioned, some days might be shorter study sessions, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. Some days are going to be longer. You're going to spend 2 or 3 hours because you want to complete a full section. So the SAT reading, for example, is 65 minutes. The ACT math is 60 minutes. So sometimes a section itself, just doing it takes you about an hour. Take about a 10-minute break to decompress, then go over that in detail, check over your work, see what questions you didn't understand that you'd maybe want to ask your tutor about, see what questions you might have made careless mistakes on, see what content you need to improve on. Oh, I didn't remember the area of a trapezoid. That's something that's a flashcard I need to make right now, and I need to add that to my pile of things to memorize. Take the time going over it, but that might be one of those 2 or 3 hour days where you're really doing lengthier sections and going over in detail. But the regularity matters. So it's not about putting in 20 hours a week. Typically, we recommend 4 to 6 hours a week is plenty sufficient to see any amount of improvement. This isn't for a student who wants to go up 20 points on an SAT or 1 point on an ACT. This is a student who wants to go up significantly in score. You can do that with a small handful of hours a week. but we ask that you do it in a very dedicated way. So back to one of our earlier slides, avoiding those distractions that we talked about, and the regularity. Make sure that you're seeing the material as regularly as possible. And the best analogy I can make to that is if you play a sport, so for athletes, this is something I think holds very true, but if you are a basketball player, you're going to get a lot more out of doing 30 minutes of shooting practice a day, 6 days a week, than you will for spending 3 hours one day working on your shot, but then not touching a ball for 6 or 7 days in between. You know, so that regularity is really where we can build the comfort level with the test itself.
So if I'm a senior, should I register for one or both tests this fall? So SAT, ACT? And then what if I'm a junior? What are your quick recommendations?
So for seniors, yes. Register if you have the opportunity. Register for any test that you can, because it's such an unknown right now that we don't want to have to register later than need be. So yes, definitely take advantage of, at the moment, any test that is available, register for it, try to guarantee that seat, assuming that the test does in fact take place. If you're a junior, the ideal plan typically, and we'll see what dates become available for you and how they prioritize students who are registering for these tests. But if you're a really strong student, if you're the type of student who maybe is going to be in contention for some type of national merit consideration, then testing in the fall is ideal. You can get it out of the way before AP exams or any type of spring, like extracurriculars are going to impact your schedule. And if you're a junior who's a student who's that advanced, you've probably already taken the necessary curriculum. You've had that exposure to the Algebra 1, 2, and geometry, so that if you're taking pre-calc or even calculus as a junior, you're probably in great shape to be able to perform well on these standardized tests. If you're a student who needs a little more time to finish some of that curriculum, if you're taking geometry or Algebra 2 as a junior, then I would recommend holding off a little bit, and you're going to want to plan on testing a little bit later in the school year. So probably sometime in the spring, you'd be looking at like a March, May, June type of test date. So for juniors, if you're a really advanced student, then similar mindset to current rising seniors. You want to register for the next available test dates and hope that you can get guaranteed a seat. For juniors who need a little bit more exposure to curriculum before you're going to be ready to test, then plan on those spring test dates.
All right, so here are the key takeaways for today's presentation. The testing landscape is continuing to develop, change, and evolve. So please, keep on top of what's happening in the testing world. Reach out to your resources like Chris, myself, Dana. Familiarize yourself with the testing policies of the colleges that you're interested in. So it is also ever evolving. I've got a link up on my blog right now that takes you directly to fairtest.org's list of schools who are test optional, test blind for this upcoming admission year. You can also see who's historically been test optional or test blind. Do your best to get a test date. Just like Chris was talking about, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know which test sites will be available in the fall, and it is going to flux and just change with how COVID-19 is in different regions across the country. So if you're a senior, try and get that test date, ACT or SAT, prioritize that. And remember, if you're not able to get a test date or your test sites are closed or canceled, you're going to want to share that information on your application with the colleges you're applying to. Maximize your opportunity to get prep work done. This is an excellent time. You've got fewer distractions. You can really maximize the time that you've got at home. You can maximize resources. You can maximize connecting with test tutors like Chris and his staff, with academic tutors also with Chris and his staff. So take advantage of that. They're working hard. They're available to you. Know that those resources are out there for you. So get connected. And for my San Antonio families, Chris now has a test prep center here in San Antonio. He's really excited to be joining our community. So you can get, online assistance from him, but know that he's local. So when things start opening up and people can be face-to-face again, he'll have a center here in San Antonio that you can come to. And then lastly, be smart about your testing timeline. So I was looking at my calendar here at my desk, and if you're planning on sitting for one of those 4 ACT test dates in October, This is 4 months from now, from July. So now is when you want to be prepping to try and get that maximum boost to your test score. Look back in this presentation to look at Chris's recommendations and really consider, could you take advantage of getting some extra test prep, and can you use this resource, which is Chris and his team? Is it worth that investment? Really take a look at financial aid opportunities, merit scholarships. Just because a school is test optional, it doesn't mean that they're discounting test scores when it comes to merit aid. So the investment up front in getting some tutoring and test prep assistance might really work out for you in the end in terms of the dollar amount that you get with merit aid because you've got that higher test score. So do plan ahead with your testing and set a timeline starting now.
And Nicole, if I can just emphasize something that you mentioned about making sure to get connected. One thing that I can attest to on the test prep side of things, and for Nicole and for Dana, I'm sure that it is very much similar on the admissions side of things, is that because it is ever changing by the day, sometimes by the hour, the way that these policies are changing and the releases that get put out there, it can be very overwhelming and intimidating for parents and for students to try to stay in touch with all the current information. If you have the time available to do so, then great. Read every article that's out there, follow every blog that you can, and try to stay up to date on this information. But if you have your own obligations, if you have work, or if you have school, or if you're not able to stay up to date, that's really what we're here for. And I can't emphasize that enough. Even if it's just a quick conversation because you had a question or because you felt lost, it doesn't just have to be for my current students who I'm willing to answer a question for. And knowing Nicole and Dana, I feel that they are very similar in terms of like that willingness to truly help and to truly be a resource. So please feel free to reach out, because it's very hard right now to know what information is current and accurate. So rely on us to be able to help navigate that with you.
And speaking of getting in contact, here's how you can reach Chris and his staff to get you connected to some great test prep instructors and resources. And then this is my contact information on the right. Again, I'm Nicole Walberg with Walberg College Counseling, located in the San Antonio, Texas metropolitan area. And then Dana Ponsky is the other counselor that I do this web series with. She's located in Brooklyn, New York. Both of us can work with you remotely. So please check out our websites and connect with us. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. This was wonderful.
My pleasure. I'm happy to chat about test prep anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.